Appreciate you being here. For those of you who wanted to know when it was going to be cooler,
Thanks for asking.
yeah, it is. Glad to see you here, though. We are in Revelation 13. We'll pick up the study at verse 11. We actually read that verse last week, but we want to get the thought and make sure we're ready to go forward with it. And we'll do that right after we have an opening prayer. And I've asked John if he would lead the prayer for us. So let's bow together and have a prayer.
Father, we thank you for this day and for this time you set aside to come to study about you, to be around folks with like minds that want to do your will, Father. We thank you for the opportunity. We thank you for your servant Tom, who lays out your word to us in a way that we can understand you. Please be with us as we study and learn about you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. I saw the cutest cartoon today, and if I had seen it before, I would have put it in the bulletin last Sunday. You know those little individual cups that we used to use for grape juice during the pandemic where you tore the top off. And there was a fellow standing at the door, and he had several of those in his hand. And the caption said, "Never go trick-or-treating at a preacher's door." So I thought, that was pretty good because we could have gotten rid of some of those if we still have them around. We could have given them to the kids as the candy, so to speak. In verse 11 of Revelation 13, we are introduced to the second beast. The first beast came from the sea. This one comes from the earth. And I said last week, I don't see any particular reason that it says one came from the earth and one came from the sea. There have been people who've tried to figure out what that means. If it means anything at all significantly, to me, it just means they didn't come from heaven. That the beasts did not have a heavenly origin. That one came from the sea and the other one came from the land. If you notice Daniel 7, and we made a little bit of a connection last week between the two beasts here and Daniel 7. And Daniel speaks of two beasts, and they are spoken of in the same way. Now, when this beast appeared, he looked rather harmless. If you note at the end of verse 11, it says he had two horns like a lamb. Well, a lamb, what's the thing you think of when somebody talks about a lamb? Pretty gentle, yeah. One of those fluffy little things that you want to go back and hug, And two horns would not be great big horns that would do you damage. These would be two little nubs that probably the wool would pretty well cover up. And so it looked rather harmless. But there was another part to him. It says that he spoke like a dragon. And that means, I think, with authority. As a matter of fact, where was he getting his authority? From the dragon, who was Satan. So he's getting his authority from Satan, from the dragon, and so he roars, sounds like a dragon, which would mean that he was had a voice that was powerful. We gave a notation from Matthew 7:15 that talked about those who come in lambs or sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Here was someone who came in sheep's clothing, but inwardly he was the dragon or was a minion of the dragon. For those of you who just came in, if you're not familiar with our class, we are at Revelation 13, and we have just begun with verse 11. And we'll continue from that spot. Verse 12 says that he exercised all the authority of the first beast in his presence, and causes the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Now we see a difference between the purpose of the first beast and the second beast. The first beast, and we said when we studied it, was Rome, Imperial Rome, especially the emperor, whoever he would have been at a particular time. And the first beast was to be worshipped. What was the job of the second beast? Yeah, to make sure that the people did what they were supposed to do as far as the first beast was concerned. He was to make sure that the first beast was worshipped. And he said whose deadly wound was healed, and we talked about that back when we were going through it originally. Perhaps this has to do with the kind of persecution that first came upon the Christians by Rome, with Nero as the emperor, and reached its fullest power with Dominion as the ruler. And so I would think that what was started with Nero was finished later. I said Domitian. I'm sorry, Domitian. It just now got to my ear that I heard what I said. It didn't sound right. Domitian. And I think that the second wound, the wound being healed, was that Domitian came on the scene and finished up the work that was started under Nero, or was very bad with it. David Roper, and I have quoted from his commentary on occasion, said the first beast was labeled anti-Christian political power. The second beast could be labeled anti-Christian religious power. It was the job of the second beast to make sure that the first beast was worshipped as he was to be. And so if the first beast represented the Roman Empire, the second beast represented those responsible for enforcing emperor worship. And who did that? Local officials. That was not done by the emperor himself, but he had people whose job it was to make sure to check with folks and make sure that they were worshiping the emperor. And the Concilia was one of the groups that had a tremendous responsibility to make sure that emperor worship was carried out. And I mentioned that this was the healing probably referred to the resurgence of persecution brought on by Domitian. I thought it was interesting. I have a quote from a letter that was written by Pliny, who was the governor of Bithynia. Now, those names and places probably don't mean very much to you at all, but that was a real place and that was a real guy. And Pliny was the governor of Bithynia, and he served under Trajan, the Emperor Trajan. And he wrote a letter in about 111 to 113 AD. It would have been after Domitian. And he said, an anonymous document came in with many names. I dismissed those who said they were not or had never been Christians, and who in my presence supplicated the gods and placed wine and incense before your image, and especially cursed Christ, which I hear that no true Christian will do. Don't you find that an interesting letter? What he's saying is, I did my job. I got a letter with all of the names of these people that we didn't know, and so I called them in and checked on them. And some of them said they were not then or had never been Christians. Others supplicated the gods. What does it mean, supplicated the gods? Called out to them, yes, called out to them. And placed wine and incense before your image. So who were they worshiping? Yeah, the emperor, Trajan in this case, and especially cursed Christ. And he said, I understand that no true Christian would ever do that. Now, isn't that interesting? Because there were Christians who were doing that under penalty of death if they didn't. The emperor would call them in and say, are you a Christian? And they would say, oh, no, I'm not. Well, curse Christ. Now, if you're any kind of a Christian at all, aren't you going to draw the line right there and say, I can't do that? But there were people, I guess, who crossed their fingers and crossed their toes and said, and cursed Christ and thought that would get them off the hook and they would be able to live, and they did. But Pliny here says, I put them through the ringer, but it was kind of a loose ringer, don't you think? I just asked them if they were Christians, and they said no. I asked them if they would supplicate to the gods, and they did. They put some wine and incense before your picture or your image, and I asked them to curse the Christ, and they did, and so I'm sure they're okay. We won't punish them. If somebody had failed that test, what would have happened? Their lives would have been taken. It was just that simple. And I believe the beast's greatest power was in his deception and the use of, I'm calling them pseudo-miracles to impress the people. Do you think there's a case in Scripture maybe of pseudo-miracles? Are you familiar with the story in Acts 8? When we meet a man whose name is Simon. That's all we know him as a name, but we know what he was called. He was Simon the sorcerer. And what did he give himself out to be? Some great magician. And he was fooling the people. And what's interesting, when he saw the power that the apostles had, he offered them money for it. But more than that, I think we miss the point if we say he just wanted the power they had. It says he offered them money that on whomsoever he would lay his hands, they might receive the power. What office did he try to buy? Office of an apostle. He didn't want just to be able to work miracles. He wanted to be able to make other people work miracles. And why do you suppose that was? I think that's a cha-ching thing, because he would be able to make money off of that. And I tell you, Simon Peter talked to him pretty rough. He said, your money perish with you. What does that indicate about his money? It was perishing, and what was supposed to happen to him? You go right along with your money. As a matter of fact, and good news for modern men, and I don't recommend I won't even call it a translation, because it's really not a translation. It's just putting the text in how people would say it today. When it comes to that verse, says, to hell with you and your money. Now, we consider that very crude, but you tell me what's the difference between that and your money perish with you. That's the essence of it. And so he said, please pray for me that none of these things happen to me. And Peter said, well, you better pray for yourself too. You better ask God to forgive you for the intent of your heart. But here was a man who had some kind of sway over the people. And I don't have any reason to believe he was performing genuine miracles, but he was a magician of some kind. And have you ever seen magicians do things that you shook your head and said, I don't know how in the world they did that? But you know there was trickery somehow behind it. There was misdirection somewhere behind it. one of my suite mates, when my first couple of years in college, we weren't in dorms. We had suites, 6 guys to a suite, 3 bedrooms and a bathroom and a little study room, which we used a great deal. Not. And he was a magician and was quite good at it. And I remembered, and I still have them, that he gave me a little pair of dice. And they didn't have different spots on them. They numbered spots. They just had a different color. One spot, it was different color. And you put them between your 2 fingers, and you ask somebody what color they saw there. And then you turned them over, and you said, "What color do you see now?" And it was always a different color, and they couldn't understand it. You'd turn them over, and you turn it back, and it was a different color, and you'd say, "Well, we don't get that." And you would say, "Okay, hold my finger so you know I'm not manipulating anything." And you would do that. You turn it over and turn it back, and it was different colors. Now, what they didn't realize is that when you showed them the top and said you were showing them the bottom, you were not indeed. You rolled them in your hand at that time, which they were not looking for. And then when you put it back up, they were seeing the same thing they had seen before. There was no trickery to it. It was just misdirection. And I've had people say, "I don't believe you can do that." I just have the power. That's all I can say. But there are people, and my point is that from very simple things like that to great big things, magicians are able to do things that make you go, "I don't believe that." And to follow that up, I noticed that there were some ruins of ancient pagan temples. And in one of them, they discovered pulleys and wires that ran across the front of that edifice. Now, what would you do with a pulley and some wire? What could you do? You'd make it look like something went across there, right? And people who would be thinking, and there would be a lot of noise and that kind of thing. It would be dimly lit, and they would say, "That's real. He's conjured up somebody, and I just saw them put in an appearance." And in Pergamum, this is a real place. One of the letters to the 7 churches was written to the church in Pergamus, or Pergamum, and they found there a speaking tube that ran from the back of that temple into the altar and came out between some blocks in the altar. Now, what could you do with that? You could make it sound like the altar was speaking to you, and there were people, and I'm saying it was hocus pocus kind of stuff. But that was one of the things that this second beast was doing to encourage people to worship the first beast. He deceived the gullible people. You know, I always approach, when I see some magician on television or something, I approach that with the fact that there is an explanation somewhere. I may not know what it is, but there's an explanation for that. It's trickery, it's misdirection, it's something or another. It's not real. It really didn't happen. They didn't make the Statue of Liberty disappear. I have that on relatively good authority, that it's right where it's always been. And so the job of the second beast was to do things like this to enforce worship of the first beast. And what happens in verse 16? Let me read that passage with you. He causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hand or on their foreheads. So if they don't worship the beast, which is what he's trying to get them to do, they get the famous mark of the beast. Boy, is that not a hot topic? Do you know all of the things that the mark of the beast is supposed to be? Can you imagine? It's identity chips. I'm satisfied. And I'm sorry to confess this, but our puppies have the mark of the beast because they've been chipped. So if they get out and get lost, you can put that little thing to them and it'll tell their name and who you're supposed to call and where they're from. And we did have an escape yesterday. And it was quite a sight to see us chasing our dachshund all over the area. I threatened to go get my shotgun and take care of that, and Sierra said I probably ought not do that. But it's supposed to be computer chips. It's social security numbers. It's been a little bit of everything down through the centuries. The mark of the beast. I'm going to tell you that the mark of the beast was not as hard to understand as we make it. Bear with me if you will. At that time, people were marked. People did receive marks at that time. Some of those who received marks were slaves. You can understand that, can't you? So that if they escaped, they would know that they were slaves. They were not free men. As a matter of fact, I had a lady here. This has been years and years and years ago. Most of you don't know the story. But when somebody is baptized, especially a young person, we gather around them and sing, "Pierce my ear, O Lord." And she thought that was the awfulest song she had ever heard in her entire life. And it was blasphemy. And she said her husband would never have let that song be sung anywhere he was the preacher. And I said, "Do you know the story behind that?" She said, "No." I said, "Well, it might help if you knew the story. If there was a slave and the slaves were to be released every 7 years, that was a part of the law. And if the slave didn't want to be released, maybe he was married to another slave and it wasn't her time to be released, and so he didn't want to go without her. Or maybe he really liked his master and he didn't want to be released. You know what they did? He went to the door, they took an awl, and they put a hole in his ear. And ladies, I doubt if it was one of those little ones like you have in your ears for your pierced ears. I bought a battery for my car today. I'll have to tell you more about that later. But the guy who waited on me had a hole like that in his ear. And I wanted to ask him, had he been a slave who wanted to stay? But I didn't have the nerve to do that. But the song says, "Pierce my ear, O Lord, I pray. Take me to your door today. I will serve no other God. Lord, I'm here to stay." And that's a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. So slaves were marked for various reasons. And also defeated soldiers were often marked in some way. If the emperor of Rome had this legion of soldiers and they went out and did not distinguish themselves in battle, it was kind of like wearing the "you're not a good soldier" badge. It reminds us of Esther, who had it wear the scarlet A. So they had to wear a mark to prove that to show the world they were not very good soldiers. Why did people have to wear marks then? Look at verse 17, if you will. In verse 16, we noticed that they were marked, that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. So, what was the purpose of the mark? So you could do business, buy and sell. Well, what was it then? If you bowed to the emperor, if you supplicated the gods, I love that word. I'm going to use it Sunday, just stay by. I don't know how, but I'll work it in somehow. And if you did all of those things and cursed Christ, you got this little certificate. that said you were loyal to the emperor. And they would roll it up, they would put some wax on it, and they would put a signet mark on it. Now, sometimes it was a ring that was worn, and sometimes it was just a stamp. But they stamped that. So you wanted to go down to the shambles, is what the marketplace was called, and you wanted to sell or buy, and they said, do you have a right to be here? What's the only thing you had to do? Show them your certificate. Show them your mark. Show them that you were loyal to the emperor. It was not, and what just really gets me, and may I go back and reiterate something I've said repeatedly? Our first thought must not be, how does this apply to me? Our first thought must be, how did this apply to the first people who read it? I doubt if Social Security numbers and computer chips meant a thing to the people who read this in the first century. I can't imagine that there were Jews sitting around saying, well, you know what that means? We're going to get Social Security cards someday, and that Social Security number, that'll be our mark. We'll be marked. Isn't that crazy? We have to look at what it meant originally to the people who read it for the very first time. And if you take it something like that, you know what you have to keep doing? You have to keep updating it as something else comes along. Whatever the thing is, that's your mark. No, the people who read it knew what their mark was. It allowed them to buy and sell. And then he said, it either has the name of the beast, and the certificate would have had the name of the emperor on it, whoever the emperor was at the time, or the number of his name. Now, here's where people have a whole lot of fun with verse 18. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. His number is 666. Have you heard that? The mark of the beast is 666. What's the nature of apocalyptic literature? What do you have to make sure you look at in apocalyptic literature that you consider? Symbolic language, symbols, figures. Everybody's tried to figure out what the mark of the beast or what the number of the beast is, what 666 is. And if you want to do something, have some real fun, look up all the people it's been. It's been nearly every United States president. It has been Henry Kissinger. I thought that one was great. Henry Kissinger is the beast. It has been every world dictator. It was Stalin. It was Hitler. And so what they would do is, you can assign a number to even the letters of the English alphabet. You can let each number represent a number, let each letter represent a number. And if you can get enough, you can come up with 666. And so they would get real creative. If it didn't work in Greek, they would do it in Latin. If it didn't work with just his name, they would add his title. They played all kinds of games with getting it to come out to 666. If it is the number of a man, then do you have to play games with it to get that done? And does it change from year to year to year as to who it is? I would think it does not. Let me say some things about it that might help us a little bit. First of all, if you are reading in the King James or the New King James, you noticed it says, let me read verse 17, 18 again. And that no one may buy or sell except one who has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. Now there's a problem here. One little definite article has been inserted in the original text. A is not in the text. It says, but it is the number of man. And the word is anthropos. What do we get from anthropos? A study of what? Anthropology, which is the study of man, not a man. An anthropologist doesn't just study John. I mean, there would be a lot there to study, but that's not the purpose. She studies mankind. And so the text is really saying 666 is the number of man. Now, that itself puts a little different spin on it. Here's why. What would be the number of deity? What was the number of wholeness or completeness? 7. You remember why? 3 represented all that is divine, the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. 4 represented all that is earthly, the 4 directions, north, south, east, and west. So you put all that is divine and all that is earthly together, you get 7, and you get absolute perfection, wholeness, completeness. What would 6 be? Less than that. And so, if 7 is the number of completeness, what would 777 be? Absolute, total completeness. If 6 is the number of man, what would 666 be? The complete number of man. And so what we're seeing here is that this is not to be understood as a particular person. It is not a man. I don't know why they put that in there, but indeed it is not in the original text, and I'm sorry about that. It's just not there. It has been added by translators down through the year someplace, but it's not in the text.
They added that so they can make movies later on.
What's that?
They added the A so they can make movies and books.
That could be. And you know, they do this occasionally, and we don't even get that. For instance, the passage, it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. John 1:1. Do you know what our Jehovah's Witnesses friends have done in their personal translation? They put the A in there. And in their translation it says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was a God. Which works very well with the rest of their doctrine that says, so are you and I. He's just as of a different level than we are, but we're all God's. And I just say, we've got to be careful, folks. You've got to be careful with translations. You really do have to be careful with translations. A little thing like that can throw you off. And so what he's saying is, it is the number of mankind, 666. It is 1 short of 7, and it is not the number of perfection. Who would have the number of perfection? The saints. the Christians, the martyrs, who would have the number of imperfection. Everybody else, mankind. And I think that the comfort here, and I've tried to say that before, is that things look really bad. I mean, about this time, if you're a Christian, aren't you about ready to go jump off a bridge somewhere? It doesn't look too good here, except that there is this underlying message that evildoers will ultimately be punished, and that saints will ultimately triumph. It may not happen as fast as you want it to, but it will happen. And just hang in there. And I think that's a major theme in Revelation, is just hang in there, it's going to get better. Okay? Let me just say a word or two about chapter 14 here, and then we'll be ready to start on it next week. And I would ask you to read the first several verses of it. Read the whole chapter. It's not that long, but we won't certainly get over that. Chapters 12 and 13 introduces us to the unholy Trinity. Who made up the unholy Trinity? The dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth. The devil, the Roman Empire with the emperor, and all of those who were local authorities who were enforcing emperor worship. Chapter 14 switches. And it says that even though Christians are overwhelmed, they need to focus on God and His resources. They need to see what's waiting for them. And the scene shifts to heaven. And chapter 14 opens with this wonderful sight of the Lamb and 144,000 saints in heaven singing. Now, if you thought 666, you could have a lot of fun with it. Wait till you get to 144,000, and we'll have a lot of fun with that one. But I think chapter 14 says it really is going to get better if you can just see what John was privileged to see. You get a peek into heaven. And chapter 14 is divided into 3 sections, and you can mark them easily because each of them begins with either the words I saw or I looked. So there are like 3 little visions set up in chapter 14. Thank you very much. I appreciate it greatly.